The Great Assembly Hall of Centauri Galactic Academy had been configured for maximum capacity with attendance mandatory for all students and faculty. Katie sat in the front row beside Jake and Commander Grant while Professor Kryn prepared his presentation. 3 days had passed since the incident, and the Academy buzzed with rumors and speculation. Director Thane stood at the central podium addressing the gathered crowd. "We have called this assembly to address the recent events involving our human exchange students. Professor Kryn will present his research findings and the Academy Council will announce our decisions regarding the future of the exchange program." Katie felt thousands of eyes focused on her as Professor Kryn took the stage. Many students had avoided her completely since the incident, while others stared with barely concealed fear. She had spent the past 3 days confined to her dormitory while the investigation proceeded. "Fellow scholars," Professor Kryn began, "we are here to discuss one of the most significant discoveries in the history of galactic civilization. Not the discovery of a new species, but the recognition of capabilities we failed to understand. The central display activated showing Earth from space again, but this time with comprehensive data overlays. We have spent decades studying Death World classification, without truly grasping what those classifications mean. Today we will examine Earth not as an anomaly, but as evolution's greatest success story." The presentation began with geological data showing Earth's violent history. Continental plates grinding together, massive volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts that reshaped the entire planet. Professor Kryn explained how life had survived multiple extinction events that would have sterilized most worlds. "Earth has experienced 5 major extinction events in its history," he continued. "Each time over 90% of all species died. Yet life not only survived but returned stronger and more adaptable than before." The display shifted to show the progression of human evolution across millions of years. Early ancestors, fleeing predators, developing tools, learning to control fire, building shelters and weapons. Each advance came in response to environmental pressure that would have destroyed less adaptable species. Humans evolved under constant, selective pressure. Professor Kryn explained, "Every generation faced challenges that eliminated the weak, the slow, and the poorly adapted. Only the most capable individuals survived to pass on their genetic material." A student called out from the audience, "But Professor, how does this explain their physical capabilities?" Professor Kryn smiled and activated a new section of the display. "An excellent question. Let us examine human physiology in the context of their evolutionary environment." The hologram filled with anatomical diagrams showing human muscle fiber density, bone structure, cardiovascular systems, and neural pathways. Comparison data appeared. Alongside showing how each system compared to galactic norms, human muscle fibers are designed for explosive power and sustained endurance. Professor Kryn explained, "Their bone structure can absorb impacts that would shatter most alien skeletons. Their cardiovascular systems maintain peak performance under stress conditions that would cause other species to collapse." More data appeared, showing human reaction times, processing speeds, and sensory capabilities. But the most remarkable adaptation is their nervous system. Human brains process information and execute responses at speeds approaching theoretical maximums for biological organisms. Jake raised his hand. "Professor, why don't we feel like we're thinking faster than everyone else? Because you're enhanced. Processing is normal for your species." Professor Kryn replied, "You have no baseline for comparison. When humans say they are thinking slowly by their standards, they are still operating faster than most galactic species, at peak performance. The professor brought up recordings from the incident 3 days earlier, but displayed them at various speeds. Watch Miss Brooks' response played at normal speed. To most species, this appears to be an instantaneous reaction. Now watch the same sequence slowed down by a factor of 10. The display showed Katie's movements in extreme slow motion, revealing details invisible at normal speed. Her eyes tracked Zexathari's incoming strike, calculated trajectory and force, then selected an optimal response point. Her body shifted position to minimize damage to both herself and her attacker, while her hand moved in a precise arc designed to disable without killing. Miss Brooks performed approximately 47 separate calculations during her response. Professor Kryn announced, target assessment, threat evaluation, force calibration, trajectory optimization, damage limitation, and precision strike placement. All completed in 0.08 seconds. Gasps echoed through the assembly as students realized what they were seeing. Katie had not simply hit back in anger, she had executed a complex combat algorithm faster than most computers could process. The same data. This level of capability should be impossible for biological organisms. A faculty member called out, "How can organic neural networks operate at such speeds?" Professor Kryn activated another display showing comparative brain scans. Human neural density is approximately 3 times higher than galactic average. Their synaptic transmission rates exceed our previous measurements for any known species. Most remarkably, their brains can shift into accelerated processing modes during crisis situations. The presentation continued with examples of human capability from Earth's historical records. Soldiers performing impossible feats during combat. Athletes achieving speeds and strengths that seemed superhuman. Emergency responders making split-second decisions that saved thousands of lives. What we are seeing is not exceptional individuals. Professor Kryn explained, these are normal humans operating within typical parameters for their species. Earth-created organisms capable of adapting to any challenge instantaneously. Director Thane took the stage as Professor Kryn finished. The Academy Council has reviewed all available data and reached several important conclusions. First, Miss Brooks' actions were entirely justified under galactic law and Academy regulations. Relief flooded through Katie as murmurs of approval rippled through the audience. Second, the Council recognizes that the incident resulted from our failure to understand human capabilities rather than any aggressive intent on Miss Brooks's part. Commander Grant leaned over and whispered, "So far, so good." Director Thane continued, "Third, the Council has determined that humans do not represent a threat to Academy safety, provided that all parties understand the reality of human capabilities." The assembly erupted in discussion as students debated what this decision meant. Director Thane raised his hand for silence before continuing. The Academy will implement new protocols for interactions with human students. All personnel will receive education about human physiology and appropriate safety measures. Human students will participate in cultural exchange programs designed to build understanding between species. Katie felt hope returning as the director outlined the Academy's new policies. Instead of being expelled, she would become part of an expanded program designed to bridge the gap between human and galactic civilization. Finally, Director Thane announced, the Academy Council unanimously approved Professor Kryn's recommendation to establish a new research department focused on Death World evolution and adaptation. Miss Brooks has agreed to serve as our first research subject and cultural liaison. The assembly broke into applause, though Katie noticed some students still looked uncertain. Director Thane gestured for quiet, as he prepared to close the session. "Let me be clear about what we have learned," he said. "Humans are not primitive savages who stumbled onto space travel. They are the most successfully adapted species in known galactic history. Their capabilities may seem frightening, but they also represent hope." "Hope for what?" a student called out. "Hope that intelligence and adaptability can overcome any challenge." Director Thane replied, "Humans prove that evolution can create organisms capable of surviving anything the universe presents. If we can learn from their example, perhaps all of our species can become stronger." The assembly ended with students filing out in animated discussion groups. Many approached Katie with questions or apologies, while others maintained their distance, but no longer seemed afraid. Jake walked with her toward the dormitory section. "That went better than I expected." "Much better," Katie agreed. "Though I'm still processing everything Professor Kryn said about our capabilities." "It explains a lot, though," Jake mused. "Remember how confused we were when other students needed help opening containers or moving furniture? We thought the academy used cheap materials," Katie laughed. "And they probably thought we were showing off our strength." They reached the main plaza where Zexathari waited with several other Veltar students. His face was still bandaged, but he was able to speak clearly. Katie tensed automatically, then forced herself to relax. "Miss Brooks," Zexathari said formally, "I have come to offer my apologies for my behavior and to request your forgiveness." Katie studied his expression, seeing genuine remorse rather than his usual arrogance. "You don't need to apologize. I'm the one who hurt you. You defended yourself against my assault," Zexathari replied. "I initiated contact and struck first. In Veltar culture, that makes you the victor and me the aggressor. I am in your debt." "I don't want anyone in my debt." Katie said, "I just want us to understand each other better." The medical center at Centauri Galactic Academy had never dealt with injuries like this. Zexathari lay unconscious on the surgical table while teams of specialists worked frantically to repair the damage. His face had been restructured from within. As bone fragments were carefully extracted and realigned, Dr. Vexanari led the surgical team with her 4 arms moving in precise coordination. She was considered one of the finest reconstructive surgeons in the galaxy, but human-inflicted trauma was completely outside her experience. The force required to cause such damage should have killed the victim outright. Bone density scans show fractures extending from the nasal cavity through both orbital sockets, she announced to her team. The jaw structure has been completely displaced and will require full reconstruction, her assistant, Dr. Morin, studied the readings with confusion. The impact pattern suggests a single strike delivered with approximately 12,000 pounds of force per square inch. That level of trauma should have decapitated the victim. Yet somehow, the human managed to deliver precisely enough force to cause severe damage without fatal injury. Dr. Vexnari observed. The control required for such restraint is almost incomprehensible. In another section of the medical center, Katie sat in a small waiting room with Jake and Commander Lisa Grant from the Human Embassy. Grant had arrived within an hour of the incident and immediately took charge of the diplomatic crisis that was unfolding. The Academy administration is in emergency session, Grant explained. Half the student body is demanding that all humans be expelled immediately, while the other half is too terrified to leave their dormitories. Katie stared at her hands, which showed no signs of the violence they had inflicted. I keep replaying it in my mind, she said quietly. I was trying to stop him, not hurt him. Back home, that would have been considered a very gentle response. Jake nodded grimly. That's the problem. What we consider gentle restraint would be classified as deadly force by galactic standards. Commander Grant activated her data pad showing casualty reports from across the galaxy. I've been reviewing similar incidents involving humans in contact situations. In the past 5 years, we've had 17 cases of humans accidentally injuring aliens during what they considered minor physical contact. 17. Katie repeated in shock. Why wasn't I warned about this? Because Earth's government didn't want to compromise the exchange program, Grant admitted. They hoped that careful training and cultural preparation would prevent incidents. Obviously, that approach has failed. Their conversation was interrupted when Professor Kryn entered the waiting room. The elderly Altarian looked exhausted and deeply troubled. He sat down across from Katie and studied her with his silver eyes. Zexthari will survive, he announced. The surgical team expects him to make a full recovery, though the reconstruction will take several weeks. Katie felt relief flood through her. Thank goodness. I was so afraid I had killed him. You very nearly did, Professor Kryn said bluntly. If your strike had been delivered at a slightly different angle, or with marginally more force, he would have died instantly. The professor activated a holographic display showing detailed analysis of the incident. I have been studying the security recordings, and the results are quite fascinating. Your response time was 0.08 seconds from initial contact to completed strike. The angle of impact was calculated to disable without causing fatal damage. The force applied was precisely calibrated to overcome Veltar bone resistance. While avoiding deeper tissue trauma, Commander Grant leaned forward. You're saying she performed complex biomechanical calculations in less than 1/10 of a second? I am saying she executed a perfectly controlled defensive response without conscious thought? Professor Kryn replied. Her nervous system processed threat assessment, target analysis, and force calibration faster than most computers could complete the same calculations. Katie stared at the display, showing her movements broken down into millisecond intervals. But I wasn't thinking at all. I just reacted when he hit me. Precisely, Professor Kryn said. What you consider an automatic reflex required processing power that exceeds the capabilities of most galactic species, even when they have time to plan and prepare. Jake shook his head in amazement. No wonder everyone is terrified of us. We're walking around with combat computers for nervous systems. Their discussion was interrupted when the waiting room door opened and Academy Director Thane entered. The Zephyrian was tall and imposing, with crystalline skin that reflected the room's lighting. His expression was carefully neutral, but Katie could sense his deep concern. Miss Brooks, Director Thane said formally, The Academy Council has completed its preliminary investigation of today's incident. Katie stood up, feeling her heart race. What did they decide? The security recordings clearly show that Zexthari initiated physical contact and struck you first. Director Thane continued, Under galactic law, your response qualifies as legitimate self-defense. Commander Grant relaxed slightly. So no criminal charges will be filed. That is correct, Director Thane confirmed. However, the Academy Council is deeply concerned about the implications of this incident. The force disparity between humans and other species creates an unacceptable safety risk for all students. Katie felt her hopes crashing. You're expelling me. The Council has not reached that decision yet, Director Thane said carefully, but several members believe that human students pose an inherent threat to Academy safety regardless of their intentions. Professor Kryn stood up abruptly. Director Thane, I request permission to address the full council regarding this matter. Professor, you have already provided your expert testimony. With respect, Director, my testimony focused on human biological capabilities. I believe the Council needs to understand the broader implications of what we have witnessed today. Director Thane considered the request. What broader implications? Professor Kryn activated his data pad and began projecting holographic displays. Throughout the room, I have spent the past several hours analyzing every aspect of today's incident and cross-referencing the data with our existing knowledge of human capabilities. The display showed Katie's strike broken down into component, movements with force vectors and impact calculations overlaid in bright colors. This was not simply a case of superior strength overwhelming inferior defenses, Professor Kryn explained. Miss Brooks demonstrated a level of physical control that should be impossible for any biological organism. Commander Grant studied the projections. What do you mean, watch carefully, Professor Kryn said, as he replayed the incident in slow motion. At the moment of impact, Miss Brooks's nervous system made real-time adjustments to compensate for Zexthari's reflexive movement. She actually reduced the force of her strike by approximately 30% when her subconscious mind detected that he was falling backward. Director Thane stared at the display. You're suggesting she modified her response while it was already in progress. I am stating it as established fact, Professor Kryn replied. Human nervous systems operate at speeds and with precision that we previously thought impossible. They don't simply react faster than other species, they actually think faster during crisis situations. Jake looked confused. But we don't feel like we're thinking faster, because your baseline processing speed is already accelerated compared to galactic norms. Professor Kryn explained. What you experience as normal cognition represents enhanced performance by our standards. The professor brought up additional data showing comparative analysis between human and alien neural function. Under stress, human brains increase processing speed by factors ranging from 3 to 10 times normal rates. Other species can achieve perhaps 50% improvement under optimal conditions. Katie stared at the numbers, feeling overwhelmed. So we really are different from everyone else. Profoundly different. Professor Kryn confirmed. I believe we are looking at the most successful adaptation to extreme environmental pressure in the known galaxy. Humans didn't just survive on Earth, they evolved to thrive in conditions that would destroy any other species. Director Thane studied the data carefully. If your analysis is correct, then humans represent a completely new category of intelligence. They represent evolution pushed to its absolute limits. Professor Kryn said, Earth didn't just create strong or fast or smart creatures. It created organisms capable of instantaneous adaptation to any threat or challenge they encounter. Commander Grant looked troubled. This information doesn't help Katie's situation. If anything, it makes humans seem more dangerous to the other. Students, on the contrary, Professor Kryn replied, it demonstrates that humans possess the ultimate quality any advanced civilization should value most highly. Which is, Professor Kryn smiled as he brought up one final display showing Katie's response analyzed from a completely different perspective. Perfect restraint, he announced. Miss Brooks had the capability to kill Zexthari instantly but chose not to do so. Even in a state of reflexive response, she maintained enough control to disable rather than destroy. The room fell silent as everyone processed this revelation. Katie had not simply defended herself. She had made a split-second decision to preserve her attacker's life while still stopping his assault. Director Thane studied the analysis for long minutes before speaking. The largest lecture hall at Centauri Galactic Academy had never been so packed. Students from every department crowded into seats, while others stood along the walls or floated near the ceiling, depending on their species. Word had spread about Professor Crin's Earth presentation, and everyone wanted to see the conclusion. Katie sat in her usual spot, feeling like a specimen under examination. Conversation stopped when other students noticed her, and she could feel hundreds of eyes tracking her movements. Jake had saved the seat beside her, but even he seemed nervous about the attention they were receiving. "This is getting out of hand," Jake whispered. "Half the academy is here." Katie nodded, watching more students stream through the doors. "I just want to get through this class without causing more problems." Zexathari entered with his usual group of followers, plus several new faces from other influential families. The Veltar prince had clearly been building support for his position that humans were primitive frauds. He made sure to sit where everyone could see him, and his confident smile suggested he expected to be proven right. Professor Crin appeared, and the massive hall gradually fell silent. The elderly Altarian surveyed the crowd with his silver eyes, then activated the central display. Earth appeared again, but this time the hologram showed the planet's surface in incredible detail. "Yesterday we examined the environmental challenges of Earth," Professor Crin began. "Today we will study how humans adapted to overcome those challenges." The display shifted to show early human ancestors moving across African plains. The professor explained how bipedalism allowed efficient long-distance travel, while freed hands enabled tool use. Katie watched her classmates follow the presentation with intense interest. Early humans possessed several unique advantages. Professor Crin continued, "Exceptional endurance allowed them to pursue prey across vast distances. Sophisticated communication enabled complex group coordination. Advanced problem-solving skills helped them adapt to changing environments." Zexthari raised his hand. "Professor, these are minor adaptations that many species possess. Endurance and communication hardly explain how such weak creatures could survive on a death world." "An excellent observation," Professor Crin replied. "Let us examine human physical capabilities more closely." The display changed to show detailed scans of human anatomy. Muscle groups highlighted in different colors, while bone density measurements appeared alongside comparative data from other species. Katie was surprised to see how different human biology looked when presented scientifically. Human muscle fiber density is approximately 4 times higher than galactic average, Professor Crin explained. Bone structure is reinforced to handle stress loads that would fracture most species' skeletons. Cardiovascular systems are designed for sustained high performance under extreme conditions. Murmurs rippled through the audience as students processed this information. The numbers on the display showed humans as far stronger and more durable than their appearance suggested. Katie realized that most aliens had been judging human capabilities based on their own biological standards. The professor activated another section showing human reflex speeds and reaction times. The measurements were dramatically faster than anything else in the galactic database. Katie watched her classmates' expressions change from curiosity to concern as they understood what the data meant. Human nervous systems process information and execute responses at speeds approaching their theoretical maximum. Professor Crin continued, "Combat reflexes allow them to react to threats faster than most species can perceive danger." A student from the back called out, "But Professor, they still appear so small and harmless. How do we reconcile their physical appearance with these capabilities?" Professor Kryn smiled, and the display shifted to show a comparison between humans and other predator species from their respective worlds. An interesting question. Let us compare humans to apex predators from similar gravity environments. The hologram filled with creatures that made Katie's skin crawl despite growing up around them. Earth tigers stalked through digital forests, while massive bears demonstrated their strength. Great apes showed their intelligence while hunting in coordinated packs. Notice that humans evolved alongside these creatures, Professor Kryn observed. They shared the same environment and competed for the same resources, yet humans not only survived, but eventually dominated their world completely. The implications hit the audience like a wave. If humans had evolved to compete with Earth's apex predators, then their capabilities must be far beyond what their appearance suggested. Katie saw fear beginning to replace curiosity in many alien faces. Zexthari stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous speculation," he declared loudly. "No species could possess such capabilities without obvious physical modifications. I demand proof of these claims." The hall erupted in excited chatter as students debated the prince's challenge. Professor Kryn raised his hand for silence, but Zexthari continued speaking. "I propose we test these supposed human abilities," Zexthari announced. "If humans are truly as capable as claimed, they should have no difficulty proving it." Katie felt her heart racing as every eye in the hall turned toward her. This was exactly the kind of confrontation she had been trained to avoid. Earth's diplomatic corps had emphasized repeatedly that humans must never be seen as threats by the galactic community. "That will not be necessary," Professor Kryn said firmly. "This is an academic discussion, not a demonstration." But Zexthari was not finished. "I think our human guests are afraid to reveal their true nature," he said with obvious contempt. "They prefer to hide behind exaggerated claims rather than face honest evaluation." Jake started to stand, but Katie grabbed his arm. "Don't," she whispered. "It's not worth it." Zexthari noticed the exchange, and his smile turned cruel. "Even now they counsel restraint and avoidance. Does this seem like the behavior of apex predators to you?" The prince began walking down the amphitheater steps toward Katie's row. His followers came with him, creating a small crowd around her seat. Students throughout the hall craned their necks. "To see what would happen, I think it is time we settled this question permanently," Zexthari announced as he reached Katie's row. "Either humans are the dangerous Death World species they claim to be, or they are primitive frauds who somehow acquired space travel through luck." Katie remained seated, trying to project calm confidence. Despite her racing pulse, "This isn't necessary," she said quietly. "We're all here to learn, not to prove anything." "But learning requires evidence," Zexthari replied, "and I see no evidence that humans possess any special capabilities whatsoever." He reached out and grabbed Katie's shoulder, roughly intending to pull her to her feet. The gesture was meant to demonstrate human weakness and his own dominance. In Veltar culture, such physical contact was a clear challenge that demanded response. Katie felt the pressure of his grip and automatically estimated the force being applied. By Veltar standards, this was probably significant strength meant to cause discomfort or pain. By human standards, it was barely noticeable pressure that wouldn't even leave a mark. "Please, let go," Katie said, maintaining her calm tone. "You're making other students uncomfortable." Zexthari's grip tightened, and he leaned closer. "I think you are the one who is uncomfortable," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Show us this legendary human strength, or admit that your species has been lying about their capabilities." The hall had fallen completely silent as hundreds of students watched the confrontation unfold. Katie could see Professor Kryn moving toward them, but he was too far away to intervene quickly. Jake was tense to move, but she shook her head slightly, warning him to stay back, when Katie continued to sit calmly without responding. Zexathari's expression turned ugly. "Perhaps humans need stronger motivation," he said, and delivered what he considered a firm, disciplinary strike across her face. The slap echoed through the silent amphitheater like a gunshot. For Zexathari, it was a moderate correction designed to establish dominance without causing serious injury. For Katie, who had grown up on a world where playful wrestling with friends could break alien bones, it was barely noticeable contact, but the public humiliation and clear assault triggered reflexes that billions of years of evolution had hardened into automatic responses. Katie's training kicked in before her conscious mind could stop it. Her hand moved in a simple defensive counter that any human teenager would know from basic self-defense classes. The impact lasted less than a tenth of a second, but the sound was nothing like Zexathari's slap. Bone cracked with a wet, snapping noise that made students throughout the hall gasp in shock. The Veltar prince staggered backward, clutching his face as blood flowed between his fingers. 3 seconds had passed between his strike and Katie's response, but in that brief time, everything changed. Zexathari collapsed to his knees, making horrible wet noises as he tried to breathe through his shattered nose and fractured jaw. His pale blue blood pooled on the white floor while his followers stared in frozen terror. Katie stood up slowly, staring at her hand in horror. "I barely touched him," she whispered. "I was trying to be gentle." The amphitheater erupted in chaos as students screamed and scrambled for exits. Some species fainted from shock, while others activated emergency beacons calling for medical assistance. Security forces poured. The next morning, Katie woke to find her data pad flashing with messages. Someone had posted comments about yesterday's class discussion on the Academy's student network, and the responses ranged from curious to hostile. Most students seemed to agree with Zexathari that humans were probably not as advanced as they claimed to be. Jake met her at breakfast, looking tired and frustrated. "Did you see the forum posts?" he asked as he sat down with his tray. "I stopped reading after the first dozen." Katie replied, "Some of them are pretty nasty. The worst part is they're not even trying to be mean." Jake said, "They genuinely think we're some kind of primitive species that got lucky with technology. One post suggests that humans probably found abandoned alien ships and figured out how to use them." Katie picked at her food without much appetite. "Maybe we should just focus on our studies and ignore the gossip." "That's getting harder to do," Jake warned. "Zexathari has been talking to students from the major galactic powers. His family has influence in the Veltar Empire, and people listen when he speaks. If he convinces enough students that humans are dangerous or primitive, it could affect the entire exchange program." Their conversation was interrupted when a group of Veltar students approached their table. Zexathari led them with his usual confident stride. He was tall even by Veltar standards, with pale blue skin and silver hair that seemed to move on its own. His eyes were the color of winter ice and just as cold. "Good morning, humans," Zexathari said with false politeness. "I hope you are enjoying your stay at our academy." "Good morning," Katie replied carefully. "Is there something we can help you with?" Zexathari smiled, showing teeth that were too sharp. "I was hoping you could settle a debate. My friends and I are having..." We were discussing the biological classification system and wondering how a species from a supposed death world could evolve to be so small and weak. Katie felt Jake tense beside her, but she kept her voice level. Evolution doesn't always favor size or strength. Intelligence and adaptability can be more important for survival. Indeed, Zexathari agreed. But surely a truly dangerous world would require physical capabilities beyond what we observe in humans. My research indicates that the average human has less muscle density than most galactic species and requires constant nutrition to maintain basic functions. Different worlds create different challenges, Katie explained. Earth's environment shaped us in ways that might not be obvious from simple, physical measurements. One of Zexathari's companions spoke up. What kind of challenges could possibly exist on a backward world that would require any special adaptation? Katie paused, considering how much to explain. Earth has variable weather, patterns that can shift dramatically in short periods. We experience everything from extreme heat to freezing cold, often in the same location across different seasons. The Veltar students exchanged glances and Zexathari laughed. You mean your world has climate variation? Most inhabited planets experience some degree of weather change. That hardly qualifies as a significant evolutionary pressure. Earth also has high seismic activity, Jake added. Earthquakes and volcanic eruptions are common events that early humans had to survive. Natural disasters exist throughout the galaxy. Another Veltar student dismissed. Any intelligent species learns to predict and avoid such events. Katie could see that nothing she said would convince them. To species that had evolved on stable garden worlds, Earth's challenges probably did sound manageable. She had no way to explain the constant pressure of living on a planet where the environment itself was actively hostile. Perhaps we should continue this discussion in class, she suggested. Professor Kryn seems to have prepared a comprehensive presentation. Zexathari's expression turned mocking. Yes, I look forward to seeing what excuses your professor offers for human weakness. Though I suspect the truth is that humans simply exaggerate their world's dangers to seem more impressive. The group moved away, leaving Katie and Jake alone at their table. Jake shook his head in disgust. They have no idea what they're talking about. Maybe that's for the best, Katie said quietly. If they really understood what Earth was like, they might be even more afraid of us. The morning classes passed without incident, but Katie noticed more students staring at her in the hallways. Word had spread about the confrontation, and everyone seemed to be choosing sides. Some aliens appeared sympathetic, while others looked suspicious or hostile. When comparative species biology began that afternoon, the amphitheater was packed. Students, who normally skipped class, had shown up to see Professor Kryn's presentation about Earth. Katie took her usual seat and tried to ignore the attention Professor Kryn entered and immediately activated the central display area. The space filled with a holographic image of Earth as seen from space. The blue and white marble hung in the darkness, looking peaceful and beautiful. Class 12, Death World Designation Earth. Professor Kryn announced, home to the species known as humans and approximately 8.7 million other life forms. The image zoomed in, showing Earth's surface in detail. Massive storm systems swirled across the oceans, while mountain ranges rose like knife edges from the continents. The professor began explaining Earth's basic statistics, starting with its size and mass. Gravitational force is 2.6 times Galactic Standard. Professor Kryn continued. Atmospheric pressure is 1.8 times normal with an oxygen content of 21%. Several students gasped at the gravity measurement. Most inhabited worlds had gravity close to galactic standard, which was based on the average across all civilized planets. A world with nearly 3 times normal gravity would be crushing to most species. The display shifted to show Earth's weather patterns in action. Hurricanes larger than some space stations churned across the oceans. Tornadoes carved paths of destruction through landscapes. Blizzards buried entire regions under meters of snow and ice. Weather systems on Earth regularly generate winds exceeding 300 kilometers per hour. Professor Kryn explained, temperature variations can range from -60 to +60 degrees Celsius in a single day, depending on location and season. Katie watched her classmates' faces as the professor continued. The casual dismissal she had seen earlier was being replaced by growing concern. These were weather conditions that would kill most galactic species within hours. Zexthari raised his hand. Professor, these conditions you describe would make complex life impossible. Surely you are exaggerating the severity. I am reading directly from the Galactic Survey Corps reports. Professor Kryn replied, would you like me to display their atmospheric analysis data? Before Zexthari could respond, the professor activated a new section of the display. Chemical compositions and radiation levels appeared in scrolling text. Katie recognized some of the measurements from her basic science classes, but many of the readings meant nothing to her. Earth's atmosphere contains trace amounts of compounds that are toxic to most known life forms. Professor Kryn continued. The planet also experiences periodic magnetic field fluctuations that expose the surface to harmful cosmic radiation. The holographic display shifted again, showing Earth's geological activity. Tectonic plates ground against each other, creating earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. The ring of fire around the Pacific Ocean blazed with dozens of active volcanic sites. Seismic activity occurs daily across the planet, Professor Kryn explained. Major earthquakes capable of destroying cities happen several times per year. Volcanic eruptions regularly alter local climate patterns and have been known to affect global weather for extended periods. By now, the amphitheater had fallen completely silent. Students stared at the display with expressions ranging from amazement to horror. Katie realized that most of them had never seen a truly hostile world before. Their home planets were carefully maintained garden worlds where the greatest natural disaster might be a gentle rainstorm. The professor activated another section showing Earth's wildlife. Predators filled the screen in a parade of teeth and claws. Lions stalked across savannas, while great white sharks prowled through dark waters. Bears demonstrated their strength by tearing apart trees. Venomous snakes and spiders showed the variety of chemical weapons Earth's creatures had evolved. Earth supports an unusual number of apex predator species, Professor Kryn noted. Most worlds develop 1 or 2 dominant hunters, but Earth's ecosystem includes dozens of creatures capable of killing and consuming organisms the size of humans, Zexthari interrupted again. But Professor, if these conditions are accurate, how did humans survive long enough to develop intelligence? They appear far too weak to face such challenges. Professor Kryn paused the display and turned to face the class. That young Zexthari is the most interesting question of all. How indeed did a relatively small bipedal species not only survive on such a world but eventually master it completely? Katie felt every eye in the amphitheater turn toward her. She had become the focus of a scientific mystery that her classmates were only beginning to understand. The comfortable assumption that humans were primitive and weak was being challenged by hard data about their home world. We will continue this discussion next class. Professor Kryn announced, "I encourage you all to research Earth's biological history and consider what adaptations might be necessary for survival in such an environment." Katie Brooks stood at the massive window of her dormitory room and watched 3 suns rise over Harmony Prime. The sight still amazed her after 2 weeks at the Centauri Galactic Academy. Back on Earth, she had dreamed of seeing alien worlds, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of purple skies and floating crystal formations that sang in the morning light. The academy stretched out below her like a gleaming city made of white metal and glass. Towers reached toward the sky, connected by bridges that seemed too delicate to hold any weight. Students from dozens of different worlds moved along the walkways, and Katie could see the variety even from her high window. Some walked on 2 legs, like humans, while others floated or slithered or moved in ways she was still learning to understand. Her roommate Vera had left early for morning meditation, as all Altarians did. Vera was tall and blue, with large silver eyes that never seemed to blink. She was kind enough, but clearly puzzled by Katie's need for so much sleep. Most aliens at the academy needed only 3 or 4 hours of rest, while Katie required a full 8 hours to function properly. Katie grabbed her datapad and backpack, then headed for the door. The hallway outside buzzed with activity as students prepared for the day. She nodded to a group of crystalline beings from the Nexus systems who chimed melodiously in response. A pack of wolf-like creatures from Fenris Prime padded past on silent feet, and Katie caught their scent of pine forests and snow. The elevator took her down 50 floors to the main academic level. The academy housed over 10,000 students from 300 different worlds, and every day Katie discovered something new about galactic civilization. Yesterday, she had watched a debate between 2 gas-based life forms who communicated through color changes in their translucent bodies. The week before, she had attended a concert where the musicians were plants that grew different notes depending on how much light they received. But despite all the wonders, Katie often felt isolated. She was one of only 12 humans at the academy, and the only one in her year group. The other human students were older and focused on advanced diplomatic studies or military science. Katie was here for basic cultural exchange, which meant she attended regular classes with aliens her own age. As she walked toward the dining hall, Katie passed groups of students who stopped talking when they saw her. Some stared openly, while others whispered to their friends. Being human made her an object of curiosity, and not always in a good way. Earth was classified as a Class 12 death world, which meant most galactic species considered it too dangerous for civilized life. The fact that humans had not only survived there but developed space travel made them something of an anomaly. The dining hall stretched across 3 acres with different sections providing atmosphere and nutrition for various biological needs. Katie made her way to the oxygen-breathing section where most humanoid species gathered. She selected items from the Human Safe menu, which the Academy had specially prepared after consulting with Earth's diplomatic corps. The food was nutritious but bland compared to what she was used to. Katie found an empty table near the viewing wall that showed the Academy's main plaza. Students moved in rivers of color and motion, while hover platforms carried supplies and equipment through the air. She was halfway through her meal when Jake Morris appeared with his tray. Jake was 19 and from New California on Earth. He was studying xenobiology and had been at the Academy for 6 months longer than Katie. His brown hair was always messy, and his green eyes held a constant look of amazement at everything around him. He was the closest thing Katie had to a friend here. "Morning, Katie," Jake said as he sat down. "Ready for another day of being the most dangerous student in school?" Katie smiled despite herself. "I wish they would stop treating me like I might explode." "Can you blame them?" Jake asked. "To most of these species, we might as well be walking weapons. Did you know that the average human child can lift 3 times more weight than an adult Altarian warrior?" "That doesn't make us dangerous," Katie protested. "We're just built differently." Jake nodded toward a table where several Veltar students sat. They were tall and elegant with pale skin that seemed to glow from within. Their leader, Zexathari, was staring directly at Katie with obvious disdain. When their eyes met, he made a gesture that Jake had explained was roughly equivalent to spitting. "Tell that to Prince Charming over there," Jake said. "Zexathari has been asking anyone who will listen why the Academy allowed primitives from a savage world to attend classes with civilized beings." Katie sighed. "Maybe he has a point. Sometimes I feel like I don't belong here." "Don't let him get to you," Jake said firmly. "You scored higher on the entrance exams than 90% of the students here. Your essays on comparative government impressed the entire political science department. You belong here as much as anyone." Their conversation was interrupted by the morning announcement chime. A pleasant voice spoke in Galactic Standard, informing all students that classes would begin in 30 minutes. Katie and Jake finished their meals and headed toward the academic wings, the hallways filled with students moving to their first period, classes. Katie had comparative species biology with Professor Kryn, while Jake was taking advanced chemistry in a completely different section of the academy. They parted ways at the main intersection with plans to meet for lunch. Katie's classroom was a large amphitheater with seats arranged in concentric circles around a central demonstration area. The professor could adjust gravity, atmosphere, and even time flow in the center space to show how different species lived and functioned. As Katie entered, she saw that Zexathari and his friends had claimed the prime seats in the front row. She selected a seat several rows back and began setting up her datapad. Other students filed in, including a group of insectoid beings who clicked and buzzed to each other, and several aquatic species whose seats were filled with breathable liquid. The diversity never stopped amazing Katie, even though she had been attending classes for weeks. Professor Kryn entered through the main door, and the room fell silent. He was an elderly Altarian with silver skin and wise eyes that seemed to see everything. His voice carried easily through the amphitheater as he began the day's lesson. "Today, we will examine adaptation and evolution in extreme environments," Professor Kryn announced. "We will study how different species have overcome challenges in their native worlds to achieve intelligence and civilization." The central demonstration area shifted and changed, showing a barren desert world with twin suns blazing overhead. The professor explained how the Iridian people had developed crystalline skin to reflect heat and the ability to store water in specialized organs. The display shifted again, showing an ice world where the cryogenic species had evolved antifreeze blood and fur that generated its own heat. Katie watched with interest as world after world appeared in the demonstration space. Each species had faced unique challenges and developed remarkable solutions. Some had overcome predators, while others had survived natural disasters or hostile climates. The ingenuity of life never failed to inspire her as the lesson continued. Katie noticed Zexathari turning to look at her whenever Professor Kryn mentioned dangerous worlds or violent evolution. His expression grew more smug with each example, as if he was building toward something. Finally, Professor Kryn reached the end of his prepared material. Next class, we will examine the most extreme case in our files, he announced. A Class 12, death world called Earth and the remarkable species that somehow achieved civilization there despite impossible odds. The room erupted in excited chatter as students turned to stare at Katie. She felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment as dozens of alien eyes focused on her. Some looked curious. While others appeared frightened or disgusted, Zexathari stood up from his seat and his voice carried clearly through the amphitheater. "Professor, why waste time studying failed evolution?" He called out. "Everyone knows Death World. Species are too primitive and violent for real civilization. They might have stumbled onto space travel through luck, but they will never truly belong among civilized peoples." Professor Crin's silver eyes narrowed slightly. "That is an interesting hypothesis, young Zexathari. Perhaps you would care to present evidence for your conclusion." "The evidence is sitting right there," Zexathari said, pointing directly at Katie. "Humans claim to come from a world of constant danger, but look how weak and small they are. If Earth was truly dangerous, they would have evolved to be stronger and larger like real predator species. Instead, we see a pathetic creature that probably survived through hiding and scavenging." Katie felt anger rising in her chest but forced herself to remain calm. Getting into an argument would only prove Zexathari's point about humans being primitive and violent. She had been briefed extensively about representing Earth with dignity and restraint. Professor Crin studied both students. "Carefully, we will examine all the evidence next class," he said finally. "I think you will find the reality quite fascinating." As students began filing out of the classroom, Katie remained in her seat until the room emptied. She had no desire to face more stares and whispers in the hallway. Jake had warned her that some students resented human presence at the academy, but she had hoped to avoid direct confrontation.